Do you see venture capital as a platform, as a viable platform to access Chinese corporates, or should the foreign investor be thinking of something else?
Well, I always like to use the word catalyst. I always thought that a word that I used a lot in investing in China is to be a catalyst for change, whether it's to create a new product, support an entrepreneur with a new idea, was a good idea. So catalyst today may be a little different than the catalyst in the 80s and 90s. A catalyst today might be to accelerate the branding strategy of China. A catalyst today might be to accelerate China's outreach, or what we call China outbound, which I think is really starting in earnest today. So I would say that the new models of China is, if you are not focused on three things: international distribution, technology, or branding, you're probably missing the great story of the next 10 to 20 years of Chinese entrepreneurs. So I think those three areas would be some, not all, but those are three important areas to look at for investing in China.
The Chinese government has been somewhat very slowly liberalizing access to capital, international capital. There's the QFII scheme and so on. Why is that access to international capital so slow in developing in China? What is your take on that?
Well, one issue, I was talking about this recently. I think the cycle, if you look at the last 2 years, and I'm not an economist, but looking at it from a financial point of view, I think that what China has just come through is a cycle of high inflation, quickly moving into deflation as a result of the world economic crisis. I believe that China's economy learned something, that it's easier for China to solve the problems of deflation than inflation. And so if we used a car as a metaphor, China has a great accelerator, but the brakes are a little shaky. If you look back to 2007, 2008, that was a frightening period for China, particularly China's leaders, because the level price, the acceleration prices, primary product prices, that area was very difficult to challenge, because the ability to China control inflow of capitals was very limited. So you couldn't seal off the world's capital from moving into China. When the world stopped in this economic crisis, that money stayed away. And when China was faced with deflation, they had two tools, not one. They had monetary policy, because they had banks that could lend money, and they had fiscal policy, where actually the US really only had one. It only had fiscal policy to deal with the crisis. So I think in looking down the road, what are the measurements of capital? I think all roads lead to the currency conversion issue. And my view is that until the currency is broken from the dollar, it will be very difficult to control inflation, because on a globalized world, the flows of capital that will attack that link will increase, will come back again. So I think ultimately China, when it makes that decision, who knows, but I think it will make it sooner rather than later.
What's the cost of real capital in China like for the private sector? And is that the kind of a mismatch which you serve into as a result?
Well, the cost of capital, it's a complex question, because if you look at the cost of capital, first to the banks, right now that's incredibly low, because you really have no capital markets industry to compete with banks. So intermediation of the banking system has a huge advantage. And some of that flows to the benefits of corporate China. However, even at the cost of cheap borrowing, or cheaper borrowing perhaps in world markets, you can't run a business, a sophisticated business, on one type of financial instrument, which is bank debt. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge. It's not so much the cost right now, but also at what point in your business cycle do you raise capital, short, medium, or long?
But at the same time, you would find that there is a whole range of Chinese corporates that don't have access to capital because the banks don't get to them. Within the Chinese environment, you see a lot of innovation coming through. If you talked about logistics in the 1980s, today the internet and that part of technology is really driving a lot of change in China. So what do you see happening, I mean, on the ground?
Well, surprisingly, the innovation in capital sourcing, and this it comes from the private sector, and probably not so surprising because they have to be more innovative. But I think capital sourcing for entrepreneurship is actually fairly robust, because if you think of foreign direct investment that's coming to China, still controls the largest portion of any country in the world, even in this down cycle. So direct investment or venture capital or private equity, there's still sources of private equity. But of course, you and I know that that's expensive capital longer term. But I'd say to get started in China is not difficult. But to move from that first phase to the second or even the third, that's the challenge. And so what I think is well understood in Beijing is now that the banking system is not only put into motion as a successful banking system and expanding, but I think the next step is a capital markets industry. Without that, I think you're going to, you will see a stalled evolution of a growing economy.
As it becomes increasingly horizontal, is there one China in that sense? And do you find the same horizontal model replicated in Beijing in a way that's different from Shanghai, it's different from the way in Chongqing or Shenzhen? What's the country looking like on the corporate front?
Absolutely, there are 1,000 Chinas, and and you're looking at it geographically and culturally, and you and I see this every day, the differences in style and business and geography. So that's well understood. In terms of what unifies China, I think infrastructure has played a huge role in unifying the marketplace. Insofar as what China is as an economy that's governed, I think we're definitely moving from a managed economy to a regulated economy, and that process is not yet complete. But to get horizontal, that's what it's going to take. It's going to be an economy based upon rules, and rules are going to be the key to whether China really becomes a true global player or whether it stays the largest of large emerging economies.